This is a controversial topic because every single year, the standards in terms of UCAT that you need to get an interview go up and up and up. And now for the Metro students, it's just getting harder and harder and harder. At the same time, there's a lot of pressure, I think, particularly on parents to get their kids to start UCAT early, but also there's a lot of people online who will also be quite negative towards the kids who get put into the UCAT at an early age and say nah, you've got to just let kids be kids, etc. So this is what I think are both sides, the pros and cons of the argument, and what I think, bearing in mind it's just my opinion on what people in this situation should now do, given that the spots are getting so competitive, and you will have to balance ATAR with UCAT in years 11 and 12. So there's a few points that I want to discuss initially. I genuinely think if you practice for 3 months just on the UCAT, you would be pretty close to your peak. That being said, no one does that unless you're in uni because you have to balance year 12 and UCAT because you have to sit UCAT in that sort of July, August period in year 12. If you're a uni student, like genuinely, if you spend between 3 to 6 months of dedicated practice, I think that's okay. Now, because we can't just do 3 months of hard out UCAT practice, then you need to draw that process out of it. I think the minimum would be sort of 6 to 7 months, which is basically after you finish year 11, you can start over the November, December, at that period over the holidays, and then practice until July. If I was going to sit the UCAT again, that's probably what I would do, because I would rather sort of do it in a more condensed way, rather than sort of drawing it out over time. The challenge with this approach is you have to balance year 12 and ATAR, and so it's pretty tricky. But most people, I reckon somewhere between 6 and 18 months is the sweet spot. Uh, two less than 6 months, I think, is an issue because it's going to be very hard for you to push your score up whilst also balancing year 12, unless you're sort of rural. And more than 18 months, I think you'll be well prepared. But most of the people I think who start UCAT at such an early age, that early practice is not it's not very useful. You'll either forget it, won't be able to maintain it, or you could be spending your time more there's an opportunity cost to your time. You could be spending it in ways that help your learning better than just doing UCAT prep. So for most people, somewhere between the end of year 10 and the end of year 11. So essentially any time over that span is reasonable for starting UCAT. But once you start, you need to maintain consistency. There's no point doing 2 months, not touching it for 6 months, and then doing it again. I would avoid doing that. So early prep means you can prepare without the ATAR hassles. People will make the case if I start in year 10, my son or daughter doesn't have to worry about year 11 and 12 subjects, and they can just do UCAT work. Um, However, it takes time away from your year 8 to 10 subjects, and that's where you're learning a bit more of the meta skills that are helpful for both UCAT and year 12. It would be interesting to see if a student who was just genuinely good at year 10, by the time they hit year 12, beats the student in the UCAT who has been practicing UCAT in years 8, 9, and 10. I wouldn't be surprised. And then if you start early, you're going to forget some of what you learned. You're going to go up and then down and then up and then down because you're not going to be able to consistently practice for 1 hour a day for 3 years. And that's going to seem like a big commitment when someone else just practices for 6 months and then gets the test done. So that's the different sides of it. Now, I think from lots of parents' perspectives, they might put their child into the selective school exams. So that means from, end of year 7, start of year 8, they're already doing a class. They hit the selective school exam, which I think is pretty good prep for the UCAT, to be honest. Even if you don't want to go to the selective schools, just sit the exam is a decent way of preparing. And then after that year 8 exam, they sort of think, what should I do now? Um, you know, do I just stop the selective school class because that's done? Well, I see UCAT's on the horizon. Maybe we should start preparing for that. And I think if a parent wants to put their child into a class, and if the child is set on med, which is like you need to have a pretty good story to be sent on med when you're like 13. But let's say like, your parents are a doctor, you know the scenario well, you've done some work experience and you really want to do med, you can't think of yourself doing anything else, then I think it's reasonable if you really wanted to do some sort of classes between year 8 and 10, but I wouldn't necessarily do UCAT classes. So I would focus on the meta skills that will help with both your UCAT and your ATAR, because ultimately you're being tested on maths and number skills, reading comprehension, and logic and problem solving. You don't need to do specific UCAT questions to work on these three areas. And if you're good at those three areas, that will help your ATAR subjects as well. So if you want to prepare for VR, rather than just doing VR questions on the UCAT, can you work on your reading speed? Can you read a couple of books that you enjoy and retain some of the information? So, try reading, or if you don't like reading, try and find a couple of books that you like, and that will help with your comprehension. Can you work out what information goes in different parts of the text? What information is more likely to be in the introduction, body paragraphs, conclusion? Can you work out how correct answers are normally worded versus incorrect answers? These strategies go beyond the UCAT. They'll apply to your VCE, ATAR studies as well. Some knowledge of probability and statistics is helpful, knowledge of Venn diagrams, and again, this can go beyond the UCAT itself. So there might be, specific resources that help with your logical reasoning, which are better than just doing UCAT questions repeatedly. Then the good meta skills for QR are things like mental maths. If you're good at your times tables in your head, that'll help a lot. Knowing how to do speed, distance, time. If you're good at year 10 maths, you'll be good at QR. I think there's just a massive overlap there. So I don't think there's too much of a point really spending time on UCAT practice. The only differences would be just the mental math side of things, where students don't practice that so much in school because you have the calculator for everything, essentially. So some practice on that would be helpful. Then to learn about exam strategy. So, stress management, how do you go in exams? How can you check things? That's why I think like sitting the selective school exam, if people are thinking about it, is not a bad idea, just because you get the practice of, sitting an exam, it's time pressured, it's literally like the same areas. So that's honestly not a bad way to start things. But obviously it's a bit too early for most people. So hopefully there's two sides of the coin. Ultimately, it's a decision that every family needs to make for themselves. If the child and parents agree that they want to start UCAT prep from year 10, that's okay. If they want to leave it to the end of year 11, that's okay too. But there's pros and cons for each approach, and it just depends on what the family suggest. Now, what I suggest though is spend some time thinking about these topics. The VR pre-skills, the DM pre-skills, QR pre-skills, and the exam strategy things. And if that's something you're interested in covering, then that is an area that I think could have its own specific teaching for those year 8 to 10 students who might have finished the selective school exam, but they don't want to get into UCAT yet. They want some broad teaching that will help both with the VCE studies, ATAR studies, and the UCAT things. And this will hopefully teach some skills which you won't need to remember, and you'll be able to integrate with your studying, which will help you from regressing. And so hopefully we can create some resources that are affordable, helpful, and that, without penning these students into UCAT and medicine, teach some broad skills overall that still keep their options open. All right, so if that's something you're interested in, the link in the description is the place to go. We'll have a free call and we'll have a chat about what your goals are as a family or as a student, and then we can make a plan that best helps you to get to your dream outcome without sort of penning down such a large portion of time to just UCAT practice, which is, I think, the trap that people can fall into. Let me know what your thoughts are, and the link in the description is the place to go. Thanks very much.